Good morning. Welcome to Thursday of GEW, Global Entrepreneurship Week. My name is Devin Laney. I'm CEO here at 36 Degrees North, and we are thrilled to be hosting this week's events. Just incredible content for entrepreneurs and innovators and startups. We also have a large number of people virtually. So if you are attending virtually and you have any questions, make sure you submit those to the chat, and we'll make sure that our speaker gets those, and obviously you in the audience. If you have any questions as well, there are still lots of events going on the rest of today and tomorrow, so you can check out the full lineup on our website at 36degreesnorth.co/GEW. They're all free to attend. They're great event content, and we are just really excited about this week and all that it brings to Tulsa and our entrepreneurial community. So with that, I want to make sure that we get a chance to really hear from Shauna Corey. And Shauna is with Tulsa Innovation Labs. She's going to speak to us today about understanding customer discovery, product market fit a little bit as well. She's super smart. Comes to us recently from Atlanta, Georgia, and is a great new addition to our ecosystem here in Tulsa, and we are thrilled to have her this morning. So, Shauna, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. I'm super excited to be here talking about a few topics that I feel are really critical for startups. Before we jump in, who am I? Who's Tulsa Innovation Labs? So a little bit about me. I'm a biomedical engineer by training and came into the business side through my own hubris. Tried to start a medical device company in my undergraduate, and then promptly fell on my face and realized all the complexities that there are around startups. Have since gone on, and I was running incubator and philanthropic fund in Atlanta, moved on to medical device company number 2. That one is funded. We're about to close out our seed round. The NFL Players Association is invested in that. And so have experience both on the funder side and on the co-founder side. And what we're going to be talking about here today is where I see the most common trip-ups for folks, especially people with technical backgrounds who see lots of ways to solve problems with technology. And so we'll talk about customer discovery. First, a little bit about Tulsa Innovation Labs. So Tulsa Innovation Labs was pioneered by the George Kaiser Family Foundation to help further their mission of addressing intergenerational poverty, but doing it through the lens of creating economic opportunity and creating an economy of the future here in Tulsa. Approximately 30% of Tulsans' jobs are at risk of automation in the next 5 to 7 years. So there really is an urgent need to diversify our economy and our job pool. And in March, Tulsa Innovation Labs was stood up to help address that need. We commissioned McKinsey to do a report to identify opportunities where Tulsa could not only compete, but lead. Those 5 focus areas are energy tech, drones, virtual health, which I lead, and then cross-cutting industry enablers like data analytics and cybersecurity. So as Tulsa Innovation Labs matures, we'll be standing up and finding partners to help run programs to help catalyze the startup industry in each of these 5 sectors. So if you're doing anything in any of those, hit me up. Shauna at tulsainnovationlabs.com. So what is customer discovery and why does it matter? So customer discovery is finding product market fit. And this is critical for a startup. So startups, as defined by Steve Blank and a few others, is a temporary organization that exists to find a problem, solve it, identify a business model, scale it, and get out. Right? So this is a little bit of a different definition than some folks might have around what a startup means and what it is. But this is like the Silicon Valley perspective. But why this is so important in that scale is you really need to be sure that what you're selling solves the problem you think you're solving, in a way that people are willing to buy it. So there's 3 or 4 different components there, and we'll parse those out in a little bit. But why does this matter? Well, I would argue that anyone who is in a startup owes it to themselves to figure out if they have product market fit as soon as possible. It is the #1 most urgent thing that you can do, because if you are a very clever person, which if you're here, you probably are, you can always raise more money, you can find more money for a good idea. You can always generate new ideas. You can develop new technologies, you can create new innovations, you can find new problems to solve, but you can't get your time back. So if no one's gonna buy your product, which is a thing, you wanna know that as soon as possible so you can go ahead and get that next shot on goal. And that's really, really critical. So I come from a medical device background. It takes 5-10 years to get a medical device to market. So let's say I wanna retire by the time I'm 65. I just turned 31, so I got like, 3, maybe 4 shots on goal. It's up to me to maximize the number of shots on goal to maximize my impact. And so I don't want to spend 10 years working on something that at the end of the day, no one's going to buy. And I can give you plenty of examples of that for some really cool tech that ultimately those companies ended up falling by the wayside because of issues with the business model and product market fit. So what's the customer discovery process? So there's 4 main steps. This is pulled from Steve Blank's book, Startup Owner's Manual. But the first is to state your hypotheses. So all of us have assumptions about how our business will work. People will buy this off the shelf at the car dealership. This will be an add-on into the salesperson's bag when they go to the orthopedic surgeon. This would be used at home. People would use this in their cars. All of these are things that surround your problem and how someone would use your technology or want to use your technology. And if you owe it to yourself to identify all of those assumptions and then pressure test them by going out into the real world and having conversations with people. And it's through these conversations and having as many of these conversations as possible, you not only will identify which of your hypotheses turned out not to be correct, but also you'll identify new and exciting opportunities. And I'll talk a little bit about some case studies there. The second is to test the problem, make sure that the problem as you define it really is the problem as it exists in the world. 3, to test the product, make sure that your product is the right thing to actually solve that problem. And then once you've validated that, you can move on or you'll need to pivot. So I started talking a little bit already about assumptions. So what customers care about, how your product will be used, all of these things, and you can read them faster than I can say them, are some of the most common stumbling blocks that I see. I saw this yesterday. There was a team that was working, they're super smart biomedical engineering students. Congestive heart failure is a major issue. It's one of the most prevalent chronic diseases, super high cost burden in the US. The way that we detect today if someone's congestive heart failure, CHF, is getting worse is by looking at their weight fluctuations. So the amount of water you retain is a good proxy for how well your heart's doing. And they developed a really cool way to do it where it integrates directly into your toilet seat to measure your urine output instead of having to stand on a scale, which is an indirect measurement. And they got the system to be so precise. Current systems measure 100 milliliter increments. They can get you down to 0.1 mLs. And they went around and showed this to physicians and said, look at how much more precise you are. Well, guess what? The physicians don't care. That's not what they care about. They care the measurements that they're looking at are so gross. They totally over-engineered the thing. But what their true source of value was the convenience and the patient adherence. By integrating it directly into the toilet seat, you didn't have to have someone take out a notepad or stand on a scale. A completely passive process was really the core source of their value. And so these are the types of assumptions that if you're in a bubble and you're an engineer in particular, you tend to geek out about, but no one really cares about. How your product will be used, I talked about that a little bit, and then who will pay. So if you have a multi-sided market, and by that I mean you have many stakeholders that influence the decision-making for your product to be acquired. The person who benefits from the product might not be the one that buys it. So let's say you have a product that is for the elderly. This could be a consumer product. The person who buys it may or may not be that person. So you have to influence not only the student, or not the student, their child, their caretaker, or their physician to help that person acquire that technology. Does that make sense? So step 2 is testing the problem. One of my former colleagues said this often, which is this a problem or is this your problem? Who else is experiencing this? And if you decrease this pain point enough, is there a large enough body of people that will pay for this service, this benefit that you'll actually have a sustainable business? And the best way to do this market sensing is, again, going out and talking to people. When you go out and test your problem, practical advice here, you never go and talk to people about your solution. So you ask them questions about how they experience things, or better yet, you can go and observe them do those things and see if they are experiencing the same pain point that you talked about. So it's really easy to say, if I built you a rocket ship, would you go to the moon? What's harder to say is, well, let me use a different example. There's a really famous quote from Henry Ford that said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And that's often stood up as a counter argument against this customer discovery process, like people don't know what they want. But if you got that answer, and someone said a faster horse, you have to ask the follow-up question, which is why. So if you stop at the faster horse, you didn't go deep enough. Why do you want a faster horse? Oh, it takes you too long to get places, or oh, it's unsafe, or oh, there's a million reasons why it's better to get from one place to another more expeditiously. And so make sure that you do your interviews in a way that gets you to the core of the problem. And people who geek out about these like problem statements will say at the core of a problem statement is happiness and bliss, right? So if you keep going down the Y levels, you keep going down it, like at the end, people want to feel safe, they want to feel happy, and well-fed and clothed and all that stuff, right? So, but you go up a level of abstraction from there. This is a little bit nervous. Happy to clarify further in Q&A if you guys have questions on this, but I'll go ahead and move this along. I also have a couple other really practical pieces of advice. I'm a big fan of interview guides. So an interview guide is not a survey. It's a way for you, and I prefer to go with someone else to help take notes. You figure out what questions you want to ask. So go back to the hypotheses, go back to the assumptions. You want to make sure that when you sit down and you talk to whoever you're talking to, you're having the most efficient conversation possible. Because you want to be respectful of their time, but you also want to make sure that you get the data that you need. And so by planning which hypotheses you're going to go talk to this person about, this stakeholder can really give you insight about this specific assumption. You want to write those down ahead of time just to make sure that you're able to hit on them. And then whenever you hear something surprising, dig deeper. That is a huge opportunity. Let me think of an example. I'll give an example for the startup that I'm involved with. We were developing this technology, and we thought the real issue was that there wasn't anything good for treatment of chronic tendon pain. When we went a few levels deeper, it turns out that there is some good stuff, but there's a really high learning curve. And so we had developed this whole automated system. And then when we went to show it to people, they were like, yeah, but this is great, this is all of that, but the automation part of it isn't that it goes faster. We thought of automation that go faster. It was, we need data to know how we're doing. And so when we went out and had those conversations, that's when we realized that our value proposition was actually a little bit orthogonal to what we thought it was. I'll give another example. So we were working with a team that was developing a surgical planning tool. So sinus surgery, pretty complex. And part of the reason why it's complex is because you're trying to optimize the flow of air in passages that look like this. So you can imagine some really heavy computational modeling for how air flows through your sinuses. And if you want the optimal outcome, you may want to change, you can take a scan of the patient's face, you can figure out what parts of the sinuses you want to shape down and do all of this. And it could, theoretically, save ENT surgeons time and get better outcomes for patients. So no-brainer, right? This should be a product. Was working with a team, they went out and talked to people. No one wanted to buy the surgical planning tool. The reason why is that the physician wasn't going to get paid to do that planning process, and their outcomes they thought were already good enough. But they did stumble upon an adjacent opportunity to look at a very specific subsegment of ENT surgery where this actually would have value, the physicians would get paid. And so they ended up going back and seeking NIH funding to develop this whole new tool set. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how to test your solution. It is to your advantage to get something out there as soon as possible into the hands of your user or your customer so that you can get feedback. And you really need to be open to that critical feedback. This can look different if you're a software hardware company. Times can be a little bit different, and how you get in your hands of your patients, or not your patients, but your customers is different. You want to be able to see how interested people are. You look for positive buy signs. If you have a software or website, get that website up, buy some Google ads, ad space, and see how many clicks you get. See if anyone is interested in the product, or if you position it differently, how that changes people's level of interest. And then your channel also has differences in how you approach how to test your solution. So if you are selling a physical product, you really have to get that prototype done, but you can sell a physical product virtually, right? So if you go through a virtual channel, you should be getting Google ad space up right away, right? So there's a little bit of differences there. A little bit more about testing your solution. So this is an example, again, from the medical device space, because that's where I live. So mammographies are not great. They're the best we have, but they're not great. These blobs here, I'll help you guys look at them. So if you look on the left, this is a typical digital mammogram. And these white cloudy spaces, you can see my mouse, that you see here, and it's even more washed out on the projector, but trust me, it's not much better on my screen. This is what a radiologist would be interested in. And it's really hard to tell exactly what those structures are because X-ray isn't good at looking at soft tissue. That's why when you get a mammogram, they have to compress the tissue and it's super uncomfortable. But it's the best we have for now. There was had come up with a new technique that allowed you to actually X-ray soft tissue. So we think of X-rays for bone. He was able to get super high resolution mammography images that are the idea is that it would reduce the number of biopsies that would turn out to be negative. So if you could see it better, maybe you do less biopsies. Turns out that there's a lot of barriers to entry in the mammography space. So the guidelines around who gets mammograms, how they get them, what they look for, how the radiologists are trained to look at it, was a super high commercialization burden. Well, where else is it helpful to look at soft tissue? Orthopedics. And because he was able to get these super high quality images, so this is a traditional X-ray, you just see the bone, you don't see any of the soft tissue. If you look at CT images, which is another radiographic technique, you can see the bone and you can kind of start to see some of the soft tissue structures. And this is a toe, by the way. But when you look at the MRI, you can start to see some of the soft tissue structures, but you end up with all of this, you can see there's a black space around the bone, so you can't see where tendon and bone meets. And with his technique, you can see it all, right? And so in a physician's visit, you can now see both the soft tissue, the hard tissue, and you can get all the way down to look at where the joint level is. And so it turned out the orthopedic physicians, if they can see a patient that they did surgery on, or they want to see if you have an ACL tear or something like that, instead of having to send you to an MRI, that they can do this cool X-ray in the office, that's a huge value proposition, and it's more money in the physician's pockets. And so the incentives were aligned along with between the problem, the solution, and how to make money in a way that allowed him to move forward. So pivots. And so if you ever read case studies written by business professors, they're usually pretty linear in their narrative, right? There was a problem, and then they were brilliant, and they solved it, and then people bought it, and they had this one challenge, and look at how they overcame it. The truth is that startups move from one failure to another as quickly as they possibly can if they want to be successful. It is an exercise in failure, and so you have to be agile and be willing to pivot, and you have to be willing to about that through every step of customer discovery and customer development. If you have a solution that doesn't meet the problem, you gotta figure out how to pivot your solution. If you have a problem and solution, but your channel strategy isn't quite where it needs to be, you need to pivot and figure that out. And the best way, in my experience, to do that is to talk to people. And if you're not learning anything new, if all you're doing is confirming things that you believe to already be true, take a step back and make sure that it's not because you're not hearing the information or because you're selling, right? People will want to be nice to you and tell you what you may want to hear. It's really up to you as an entrepreneur to open yourself up to uncomfortable truths, because that's what will help make you successful. If you're interested in learning more, there's a whole bunch of books on this topic. If you are more health focused specifically like I am, I definitely recommend From Lab to Market. But the rest are all cover these in great detail. OU has a I-Core program. So I-Core was stood up by Steve Blank. They use the lean startup method, which goes into a lot of the things that I discussed here today. I encourage you guys to take advantage of them. I know that they even had some folks speaking about SBIRs earlier this week. They have this great resource, and they can help train you really practically and go through some experiential learning opportunities to figure out, do you have product market fit? I'm happy to open up the floor to questions. And if I'll let people take pictures and stuff. If you are more on like the tech science side of things, you can also go through apply to be a part of these courses through the likes of NSF, NIH. They have a program called I-Core. NIH also has a program called C3I, which is very focused on medical technologies. And then you have also great local resources here. With that, I'm happy to open up the floor to questions. My email's here if anyone wants to reach out. Yeah, question.
So I think like a lot of the times when startups are like doing the customer discovery process, and especially like when they're trying to disrupt industries, they might like uncover just like tons of problems within a certain segment. And like on the flip side, like startups also trying to have like this laser focus on solving one problem and not trying to serve too many things. What's your recommendation or advice like when they start to uncover that this has like all sorts of problems? Like where do they start? What problems should they solve first? What do you think?
Yeah, so for those online, if you can't hear because of the mic, the question is, when you go in and you observe an industry, you often see many problems. How do you pick which one to solve? So boiling the ocean is really tough. We went through something relatively similar when we were in the process of standing up the medical device company that I spoke about earlier. There's lots of opportunities around the use of ultrasound guided imaging. So ultrasounds have gotten so cheap, they're well out of the realm of just the OB/GYN, and they're starting to be used in sports medicine clinics and things like that, so that folks can see tendons like this, like I talked about earlier, but then also other structures. The issue is that they can't, the physicians, they can see the pathologic soft tissue region, and they know how they want to manipulate it physically, but they don't have the tools to do it. And this is true for carpal tunnel, this is true for chronic tendon pain, this is true for at least a dozen other clinical conditions. And so we had to pick, well, which one are we going to go after? Because a carpal tunnel procedure, they don't have a tool for that, and that's much more difficult. The way that some folks do it is you look at a combination of the market opportunity, you look at where your skill set is, right? So there were some of the things that we looked at that we were mostly mechanical engineering type of backgrounds, like a little bit of EE, but you look at your expertise, you look at what excites you, and then you also look at the pull, the market pull. And you can rank these on a scale of 1 to 5, you put them in a matrix and you can see how things hash out, and you prioritize really going at those. You'll see your top ideas, and based off of your initial data, what are the 3 or 4 that you really want to go pressure test, and then you go from there. Yeah.
There's a question from someone watching the stream. His name is Steven, and he wants to know how you do customer discovery with current clients.
Cool. So Stephen asked how you do customer discovery with current clients, and it varies a little bit by industry. I'm a big fan of, especially if they're current clients, a process called ethnography, where you go in and you observe how this person goes about their day, goes about various procedures and things like that. And it can bring to light things that you might not even know that your client is having an issue with, or that they might be resistant to tell you that they're having an issue with because they're already a client and all that stuff. And I can give you an example of ethnography working well. We funded a project that started off, it actually started off as a surgical nail, but when they would go into these procedures, they would see physicians taking these very hot fiber optic tape cables that they use to put in scopes so that they can see. The tip gets super, super hot. You're always supposed to cover the tip before you put it down. Otherwise, you can catch surgical drapes on fire. And there's surgical room fires, not trying to scare everybody, because surgical room fires in this country, like more than any of us would care about. It's some of them are because these drapes get caught on fire because they don't turn off the light box for that fiber optic cable when they put it down on the drapes. So they went around and asked physicians, they saw this happening. Every time they would go in, at least over the course of the day, at least one person would put it down without covering it. And they would go around and they would ask physicians, hey, do you ever have any issues with forgetting to turn off that light box for the fiber optic cable? Nope, not me. I mean, maybe if you're like a resident and you don't know what you're doing, and then that same physician they would see and they would go and do that. And so they developed an automatic cap that just fits on the end of the fiber optic cable and helps to address that problem. That was a company that had already been selling into the space. It was a nice little add-on and tuck-in. So it was a way for them to identify new products for that same client base. And then the other one would be in a very similar process to what I had described during the talk. You just have that same conversation with your client about, or your customer, what are some of the pain points that they're having. Maybe you think that there's a pain point, and then you go and pressure test that with them. And then identify what sort of solutions you guys can help bring to help address that problem. Okay. More questions? All right, cool. Well, you can check me out on Twitter at HeyShaunaK. You should follow Tools Innovation Labs on Twitter too. And you guys are welcome to reach out to me. This is a real pleasure. Thank you all.